Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Cha! Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, a twice-monthly podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, ask people who are harder and smarter working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton, and I work with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, and I'm joined today by Carolyn Foley. Carolyn, what is up?
You just said harder and smarter working, and I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just this week has been nuts.
It was not intentional, but it's probably true. Most people are harder than I am in many, many definitions of that term.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that is, if you want a proxy for how my week is, that's as good a proxy as any. But you know what? It's Friday afternoon. It's beautiful outside. I've cracked open one drink here of a certain type. In about 1 hour, I'm going to crack open another drink of another type, and life will be good.
Yep, all right.
So that is good. 1 hour plus. I realize it's not as late as I thought it was. We'll see. We'll see how the afternoon goes, I guess. Anyway, so, I was thumbing through my news feeds today, and I saw a really interesting paper about bald eagles and contaminants, and I was able to get the author. So I think we're going to talk to him about what I'm hoping. We'll see how it goes. What I'm hoping is kind of a success story, which would be nice, or at least a success story in progress, maybe. With bald eagles and contaminants. And so I'm hoping that it is a good conversation. But, I've thought that before and ended up sad. So we'll see how it goes this time. But
it'll be great, Stuart. It'll be great.
Anyway, so let's do some of the transitional music, and then we'll bring on our guest. Which one do we... you know what? It's research, isn't it? So here we go. Researcher feature, a feature in which a researcher gonna teach us about the Great Lakes. We really ought to do some stuff where we're not embarrassing ourselves in front of our guests before it even starts. We need to make some changes here. I apologize for that. Our guest today is Bill Rowdy, who used to be with the National Park Service, and now he's continuing on some of the work he was doing there. He's a wildlife biologist. And the author of a new paper in the journal Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. The paper is called Patterns and Trends in, polybrominated diphenyl ethers in bald eagle nestlings in Minnesota and Wisconsin, USA. Bill, how are you today?
Very good, and very nice introduction. You got it all pronounced right.
As we know, I am a professional, but so our pronunciation is good. That's awesome. But why don't we start at the very beginning? What is now I'm going to screw it up. Polybrominated diphenyl ether.
Polybrominated diphenyl ethers, and you can just go short and call it PBDEs. It make it easier for all of us. But so these PBDEs are a family of chemicals, and there's up to 209 of them. And within that family of chemicals, there's what are called congeners. And those congeners, think of it as species within a family. So these species, there's many of them, and these were brought onto the scene in the about 2000 or 1970s, and they're human-made. So they're a form of chemicals that are used mostly for flame retardants in plastics and foams and other products.
Okay. And so they brought on in the 1970s. And let's see. But so what do these have to do with bald eagles exactly? That's where I'm getting lost here.
Sure. So here's these chemicals that are in our, they're in our sofas, they're in our carpets.
Oh, these are everywhere, right. Or like in our kids' clothes, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Think about your coffee maker, the plastics in your coffee maker, the plastics in anything you have. These chemicals are stirred up into all of those products, and they help to make our products fire resistant. So, if you want a hot toaster to not burn up, you put in flame retardants. So these flame retardants are used in plastics. And of course, then there's the emissions from production of the product. There's the emissions from water waste going into our water supply system. When we clean our houses and we flush the products down our sinks because we've washed our carpets or whatever, they get into the environment. Eventually, they get into the water system. And the issue about these chemicals is that they're very highly persistent.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is they do not break down. So they remain. Once they're produced, they just don't break down very easily. And then they accumulate up the food system. So if a fish in the water gets a little tiny bit of this chemical in their body, but then a larger fish eats that fish, and then a larger fish eats that small fish, and then eventually a bald eagle eats that larger fish.
Gotcha.
And now you have what's called bioaccumulation of these contaminants. So what bald eagles help us do is they help us show where these contaminants end up in these aquatic systems.
And so in the bald eagle, so what are you sampling? Are you looking at their eggs or their feathers or their, which part of them are you looking to see where these chemicals are? Like, is it in their tissue or a particular tissue? I don't know if that quite makes sense.
Right. Well, you could look at several different places. You could look at what the buildup is in their livers or, brain tissue or something like that. But what we wanted to do, because we're the National Park Service and we like to see what's going on in our live populations of healthy animals, what we did was we went to the nestlings. So the little nestlings that are in their nest every spring, we climbed the tree and plucked the nestling out of the nest, brought it down to the ground, weighed and measured them, and then took a blood sample. So we actually took a needle, just like you would give a blood sample in the hospital, and we grabbed a small sample of blood out of the brachial vein. And then we took that blood sample and we brought it to a laboratory, an analytical laboratory, and they can measure things down to parts per billion. And so then we can measure how much of this contaminant has accumulated in these nestlings across large areas.
I see. And so you're using this partially. Well, so I guess two things. So one, how much, so the number is parts per billion. What is the rough number in parts per billion that we've seen over time? And then kind of the other thing, and you can talk about these however you want, I guess, is you're using this as like a proxy, right, for contaminant in the area. And so I'm interested in what are the other effects of PBDEs or what does this tell us about the environment in the area, I suppose?
Yeah, very good. Well, the levels, they won't be very meaningful to you because, parts per billion. Suffice it to say that in the early days when we started monitoring, they were at levels that were similar to PCBs, which were banned in the early 1970s because of their toxic effects. And by the way, these chemicals are very similar to one another. So PBDEs, which we're talking about today, are very similar in their chemical structure as PCBs, which were banned in the 1970s. So lo and behold, they have some of the same effects. They're what's called hormone disruptors. So they disrupt the thyroid system and the immune system. There's been a number of research efforts done on different animals to find out that they do in fact cause problems, and they are of concern. And so that's why they've been banned. So they've now been pretty much banned internationally, and they've started to be reduced in the early 2000s. And so what we wanted to do was see what is the effect of this ban. Have they been removed from the system? Are they slowly moving out of these aquatic systems? And we're using the bald eagle as a proxy, as you say. That's a very good word for it. And in fact, what we want to know is because we as humans also feed out of these aquatic systems, right? We eat the fish, we drink the water. We're really using the bald eagle as a model to say that if they have it, then we probably have it too.
So what do you think? Do they have it? Do we have it?
Yeah, we do. And of course, the good news is that we monitored across the state of Wisconsin pretty much from from the Apostle Islands up on Lake Superior down in Lake Michigan, outside of Green Bay, and the Wisconsin River, the Fox River, the St. Croix River, and along the Mississippi River. So a large swath of Wisconsin and into Minnesota. And what we found was that these contaminants have, in fact, declined pretty much since they were taken off the market in the early 2000s. And there's been a consistent year after year decline of something in the neighborhood of 3 to 6%, depending on which one of these different congeners, species of chemical that we're looking at. So they have, overall, they've declined.
And so
that's the good news.
And so is that decline, I guess it's just because as they bioaccumulate up the food chain or whatever, and those animals die, for lack of a better term, the PBDs, like, do they just go away, or do the little microbes eat them? What even happens then?
Right. Well, that's a really good question. And we don't know exactly all of the fate of these chemicals. We know that they're very highly persistent, so they don't break down very easily, but eventually they do break down to some extent. And so what we feel is that they are slowly breaking down and slowly being removed from the system, or some of them are just simply going into sediments and becoming deposits into sediments, bottom sediments in lakes and streams, and they're just not bioavailable to bald eagles or to us. So in a way, they're sequestered into the system.
Is that something, obviously we don't know, is that something that you think might be a future concern if we have like these, dumps full of PBDEs, or is that maybe okay, out of sight, out of mind?
No, it is a concern for sure, because as landfills leak, and they do, we build really good landfills, we try to line them, but as these things break down, we got styrofoam and we got all kinds of textile products and stuff like that in these landfills. And as they slowly break down and leach out of these landfills, they do leak into the system. So we believe that it'll be a continual problem for, decades and decades. But the good news is that they are slowly declining. At least they're not increasing. The other interesting thing is that some of these contaminants, some of these species of PBDEs get into the bottom sediments, and microorganisms tend to break them down and create other PBDEs out of one of them. So they transform to some degree. Right. And they actually transform from the least toxic down to the more toxic.
Oh, goodness.
So there is some potential that we are reducing some of what are called the higher brominated flame retardants, and we're bringing them down to lower brominated flame retardants. There are fewer of them, but they are more toxic. But so a lot of work needs to be done to figure that out yet. But still, as I say, the good news is that they are.
No, that is good news, and I'll put my plug in here. So the answer, and then Carolyn can go. So the answer is we need to fund scientists to do more work. We say this about every second episode. So got to say it. All right, Carolyn, go.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit to you describing the methods that you did. That you climbed up the tree and you pulled the animal out, and you had mentioned
the little eaglet.
The little eaglet. Yes, sorry, animal.
Very cute. And you yank it with your needle. But anyway, go ahead, Carolyn. Yeah.
So you have training originally as a wildlife biologist, and then you sort of turned toxicologist a little bit. Which skills that you had as a wildlife biologist transferred well to the work that you did in this paper and otherwise?
Yeah, well, as a wildlife biologist, in many of the years that I've done this, I've handled a lot of different wildlife. And so handling wildlife, I guess, is an expertise or a part of the picture that I felt I was best at. And so physically handling the animal, we didn't give them any drugs. They were, totally, undrugged in any way. So it takes a little bit of a skill to make sure that, what these are about 10-pound nestlings. These are not small robins. These are bald eagles. and they're 8 to 10 pounds, and sometimes they're pretty feisty. They can use their talons and their beaks to do great harm to you, unless you handle them correctly. And of course, you don't want to hurt them either. So my skill was mostly in the early days in the actual handling of the animals. And then in terms of the toxicology, I had a huge learning curve, but it was fun. It was a very interesting project.
Right. I appreciate that, because one of the things that I think I've sort of found is, you have young scientists who get really enamored with being ecologists or biologists, and then they have to transfer to something else. Like a whole bunch of people that I know who started out in like aquatic invasive species, now they do water quality because that's what people are kind of more interested in.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Some people start and get like a master's in fisheries biology and then become social scientists and go from there to being a paper pusher. So that happens in every direction. So, all right, one more question.
Well, I did a lot of the paper pushing too. So
a big portion of science is pushing paper, I think, or at least science in the real world. Yeah. So I have one question I have to ask for Angie's sake, and then we'll move on to our ending questions. And that is this. So the little eagles, are they going to be okay with all these PBDs, or does it affect them, or do they seem, as far as you can tell, to not have a significant quality of life change as a result of this?
As far as we could tell, there was no population level effects. So, we weren't really looking at that. Yeah. Mostly we were looking at the patterns of their distribution of these chemicals. So we didn't design the study to look to see whether or not these nestlings are in any way behaviorally affected. Had we wanted to do that, you would have to probably, watch them behaviorally to see if they change at all. But then usually what you have to do is give them different quantities of the chemical.
Sure. Do it experimental.
Ranging from a very light quantity to a very high dose, and see whether that affects them. And that wasn't part of what we wanted to do. So we could not see any population level effects, but we really didn't look at them.
And that makes sense. But so the story then, let me make sure I get the story of the paper. And then, yep. So PBDs, they come from flame retardants or fire protective chemicals, and the levels were fairly high, but then they've been banned for most of this century. And so now they seem to be slowly breaking down, but we don't know exactly, or they seem to be disappearing from the bald eagle population anyway, and therefore maybe the areas where they are. And we're not sure what the long-term effects of that are, right? Is that kind of a good one-sentence summary of your story here?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think I would hasten to throw in there, though, that even though these have declined, industry is always looking for ways to replace the chemicals that they have to reduce. So what happens is that chemicals like these suddenly became known to be persistent and toxic. And so they were then either directly regulated, or EPA or somebody just through, really a request or negotiation, they have, taken them off the market. But then they have to replace them with something else. And, what we have to be vigilant for, I think, as people, is to be supportive of regulations, for one thing, research into these kinds of things, and into green chemistry or lack of chemicals, in order to get the same things that we need. So there are ways to formulate chemicals that break down quickly, and we need to make sure that we're trying to do that, because what happens, even though these are declining, there is a mixture of chemicals out there in the environment, and we don't know how they play with each other. Right now there's somewhere around 88,000 chemicals that are released into the environment. And so even very, very small quantities mixed with one other chemical might be hazardous to someone's health. And if some individual just happens to get a large dose of one chemical or the other, some of these things, we just don't know how it affects people.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, this is really interesting, Bill. It sounds like important work, and I'm glad to hear that it does seem like at least some trend is down. But that's actually not the reason that we invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes today. The reason that we invited you to take part of Teach Me About the Great Lakes is to ask you two questions. First question is this. If you could choose to have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which would you choose?
Huh. Well, I think it depends on what I get to have along with it.
Okay.
If there's a really good cup of coffee with that donut, then I might go with the donut. But if there's a really good beer to go with the sandwich, I might go with the
There
beer.
you go. So you're more choosing based on the beverage than on the food item. I can appreciate it. That is great. So where are you based out of? I forgot to ask. I'm sorry.
Ashland, Wisconsin.
You're in Ashland. All right. So when I'm in Ashland, Wisconsin, normally I'd ask you, where can I go to get a good sandwich? But you know what? We're cutting through that. I don't even care. Where can I go in Ashland to get a good beer?
Oh, the South Shore Brewery.
South Shore Brewery. Done and done. Is that South Shore as in the South Shore of the lake?
South Shore of Lake Superior. They use Lake Superior water to make a nut brown ale that is very good. Okay,
future episode. Got it. Good. And so then the second question is this. So you're a wildlife biologist by training, and you worked at the National Park Service for a long time. One thing we're interested in is like what makes people good at their jobs, right? Because I think that's always good to hear. So what is it that makes you good at being a wildlife biologist? What are the key skills or traits, do you think?
Well, I think I really care about the environment. I care about wildlife. I've enjoyed working with various species of wildlife and asking questions about why they do what they do. I've been inquisitive about populations and how populations change and how our environment around us has changed. And I'm particularly enjoy handling wildlife, although I think more and more it's important that we find non-invasive ways to monitor without actually handling them.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Bill Rowdy, author of an interesting paper. We'll put a link to the paper in our show notes so that everybody can go and check it out. This is really good work, and we appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the Great Lakes.
Well, thanks for asking.
Yeah. It's always good to hear. It's always good to hear some environmental good news. It was a little caveated, but it was still nice to hear, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an important caveat though, because the point that Bill made that there's always going to be another chemical to replace the product, like the use. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, I remember. When BPA became a thing. Like it disappeared overnight from like kids' bottles and stuff, but it's been replaced too by other things. And I think that there's some thought that maybe they're kind of ugly as well. So yeah, I hear you. It's always worth remembering about, but still, it's good news is good. And so it's nice to hear good news, I think.
Yeah, it is. I also really, really enjoyed. So I guess we should note that this paper that we're talking about today, it's an open access paper. So we'll have a link to it. There are some really cool maps looking at where they actually did the sampling and things like that. So we'll post the link to that paper and maybe on a couple of other papers too that may be of interest.
Yeah, those will be good in the show notes. We're checking out. Absolutely, sure is.
And where are the show notes?
Oh, hold on. Wait. Oh, sorry. This thing, it's always... what? Oh, a message. Oh, all right. Great. Well, let's just go ahead and play that, I suppose. We got a caller. This is a caller to our new Teach Me About the Great Lakes hotline. Have I told you about this?
You haven't. What the heck is going on?
We have a Teach Me About the Great Lakes hotline, Carolyn. Anybody who wants to can call in. Area code 765-496-IISG for Illinois, Indiana, Sea Grant. And looks like we got a message here. We're asking people to call and tell us kind of the story of the Great Lakes in 2020 and 2021. So like last year, a lot of people's relationship with the lakes changed, and maybe there are things they missed about the lakes, or maybe maybe actually a lot of people enjoyed the time in nature in a way they hadn't before. So we're interested in you calling and telling us about it. It looks like we have a message from this is from the great Megan. It says right here. So let's just go ahead and play it.
Hi, this is Megan, first-time caller, long-time listener. Woo! My relationship with the Great Lakes changed in 2020 by me having greater appreciation for them. I think not being able to go and explore and being stuck at home just made me want to go and explore more. And so I had a lot of reading time and a lot of listening to teach me about the Great Lakes and other podcasts to learn more. And that's how I filled that niche. But in 2021, I'm really hoping to go and visit one of the shipwrecks that we talked about in one of the episodes, because I think that would be so cool to go diving on one of those wrecks. And that's it.
There you go. Well, thank you to the great Megan for calling in. And she sounded a little bit familiar, I think, but that's okay.
Tiny bit.
Yeah. But hey, do you have a Great Lakes story? If so, give us a call. 765-496-IISG. That's 4474. Operators are standing by. Actually, they're not, but it's a voicemail thing. So call and leave a voicemail, and maybe we'll play it on the air.
Yep.
Anyway, well, this has been a fun episode, but where can people go to find out more about the awesome work that we do at Illinois' Indiana Sea Grant?
Illinois.
Illinois. It's what Ron Zook said when he first got the job as the football coach of the University of Illinois. I happen to know. He called it Illinois. Anyway, where can they go?
All right. They can go to our website, iicgrant.org, C spelled as the SEA, not the letter C. You can also find us on social media at ILINSEAGRANT. I believe we are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. And there are also other podcasts, too. And many of our staff members are on Twitter, too.
That's right. Just go follow everybody. Do everything. And in between now and then, Carolyn, so good to talk to you. Have a wonderful weekend. Crack open a nice cold Southside Brewery brew. Or if that's not your...
And it's on Lake Superior, too. I mean, imagine... see, that's where I want to be. I want to answer that question. I want to be sitting on the shoreline of Lake Superior, drinking something delicious.
I agree, but call the hotline and leave that message. Don't tell me that now. I don't I'm not interested. And this listener out there...
I don't want to hear about it unless it's
if
on
it's
the
not
phone.
on the hotlines, 765-496-IISG, that's 4474, then I don't want to hear it. Yeah. Anyway, great. Well, in between now and then, everybody, get yourself a cold beverage, whatever that may be. Some lemonade would be nice. Please fix me a large slice. Either way, keep grating those lakes.
A tab!
Oh my God, I'm almost crying.